I was just finishing work on a project proposal, carefully checking every detail before sending it, when a loud, insistent phone call snapped me out of my concentration. Mom's name appeared on the screen, and I, already knowing that the conversation would most likely not bring anything good, involuntarily froze, hesitating before answering. The calls from my parents usually meant some kind of family drama, in the epicenter of which, as a rule, was my younger brother Jake. I took a deep breath, trying to adjust to a neutral tone in advance, and finally swiped my finger across the screen. "Hi," I said in as even a voice as I could, expecting to hear something familiar like, "Jake's in trouble again. Can you help him?" Or, "We were wondering if you could borrow some money." But this time Mom seemed to be in high spirits. "Tara, it's good that you picked up the phone," she said cheerfully, and by the way the words came out quickly, I immediately realized that something was afoot. "Your father and I are planning a celebration for your birthday." I blinked, not immediately realizing the meaning of what I had heard. "My birthday?" Yes, yes," she confirmed with such enthusiasm, as if it were about something really important. "He's in 3 weeks. We decided to have a party at our house, just for the family and close relatives. Wouldn't that be nice?" I automatically tucked a stray strand of hair behind my ear, feeling slightly confused. The fact that my parents even remembered my birthday was already a surprise. As a child, my holidays were more formal, a small cake, an inexpensive gift, if you're lucky. While Jake's birthday turned into a grand event with decorations, trampolines, a crowd of guests and expensive gifts. "Oh, this is unexpected," I said cautiously, still not understanding what all this sudden interest was about. Actually, I was thinking of celebrating it at a new Italian restaurant in the city center, with friends from work. Nonsense. Mom interrupted me, not even bothering to pretend that she cared about my opinion. "I've already arranged everything. We've invited your aunts, uncles, and cousins. Everyone's coming." I felt something uncomfortably constrict inside. I've known this tone since childhood, confident, categorical, and leaves no room for objections. It was pointless to argue. "Of course, Mom," I breathed, feeling irritation slowly spread across my chest. "Thank you for organizing all this." After finishing the call, I put the phone down on the table and just stared at it for a while, trying to process what was happening. In 30 years, my parents have never shown such interest in my birthday. Why suddenly now? I couldn't help but remember my 16th birthday. Then they promised that they would help me with driving lessons, but in the end they gave me a $20 gift card to the bookstore, saying that they needed to save money. 3 years later, when Jake turned 16, they bought him a used car without any hesitation. He broke it 3 weeks later, but not only did his parents not scold him, but they immediately replaced it with another one. I promised myself then that I would never expect anything from them again. When I turned 18, I moved out and have been building my own life ever since. Study, work, career, everything was achieved without their participation. I got used to their favoritism and even stopped being mad at it. I just took it for granted. So why did they suddenly decide to have a party for me? A naive and stupid part of me wanted to believe that this was their way of apologizing for the past, that maybe turning 30 made them rethink their attitude towards me. But the more rational, pragmatic part of me suggested that there was some reason for this sudden gesture. I shook my head, pushing away unnecessary thoughts, and went back to work. The current project was much more important to me than family mysteries. If everything goes well, this contract will earn me a large commission, which means it will add to my already impressive savings. Over the past year, I have closed 3 large projects, each of which has significantly strengthened my financial position. I made a few edits, reread the document again, then saved it and sent it to the client. The job was finished. And yet, even putting the laptop aside, I couldn't get rid of the strange feeling. Something was wrong. I was sitting at the table, carefully cutting a piece of lasagna on a fork, But the food wasn't really bothering me. I was trying to sort out the chaotic stream of thoughts that had been rapidly filling my head since I entered my parents' house. The atmosphere in the living room was almost festive. Relatives were smiling, talking animatedly, remembering past years. Someone was telling stories that I had already heard dozens of times. Someone was vying to share news about their children, repairs, pets, and work. Everything seemed to be going as it should at a family dinner, and yet I couldn't help feeling that there was something more behind this ostentatious idol. I caught Aunt Lisa's attentive gaze on me. She was sitting across from me, holding a glass of white wine in her hands, and smiling at me with the same expression that people usually have when they want to say something important but don't dare. "You know how proud we all are of you, don't you?" she suddenly said, gently leaning towards me, and her voice was so warm and sincere that for a moment I forgot about my caution. "Thank you, Aunt Lisa," I nodded, not quite understanding where she was going. "I'm serious, Tara." She put the glass down on the table, steepled her fingers and continued, "You've achieved so much on your own, without anyone's help. Good job, own apartment, stability. I remember how determined you've been since you were a kid. Even when you were only 12, you already knew that you wanted to be independent." I smiled faintly, but inside I had a feeling that this conversation had some hidden subtext. I looked at Mom, but she pretended to be busy serving dessert, and Dad hadn't said anything since we sat down at the table. And then Jake, who had been silent all evening, buried in his phone, abruptly raised his head, as if hearing something that hurt him. "Independent," he repeated with a wry smile, looking up from the screen. I would never have thought that someone could say that about Tara. There was an awkward silence in the room for a second. "What do you mean?" I raised my eyebrows, trying to speak calmly, although irritation was already beginning to boil inside. Jake lazily leaned back in his chair and twirled his expensive phone in his fingers. "It's just funny how you like to pretend that you always achieve everything yourself. But come to think of it, who paid for your college? Who gave you a roof over your head when you were just starting out?" I gritted my teeth, feeling anger rise in my chest. "Do you really want to discuss this now?" My voice remained steady, but my hands clenched into fists under the table. Jake grinned and shrugged his shoulders. "Why not? You're acting like you've never had any help." I pressed my lips together, trying to suppress the surge of emotion. "Of course, our parents helped me when I was in college, but only to the extent they considered necessary. I had to work in the evenings to pay for my textbooks, rent a tiny room with a neighbor because they didn't want to pay for my dorm, save on everything. Unlike Jake, to whom they were happy to sponsor any whim, be it an expensive car or a dream of his own business." "Do you even know how you sound?" I finally said, looking straight at him. "You didn't open your tattoo parlor because you saved up money or because you worked hard. Your parents just gave you money. Have you ever worked for someone other than yourself?" Jake grinned, but his grin became a little strained. "You know, Tara, not everyone wants to be boring office workers who spend their whole lives filling out some kind of reports. Some of us want to do something creative." His voice took on a venomous tone. "Yeah, with my parents' money," I replied. "That's enough," his father's voice suddenly rang out, calm but firm. "We're not here to quarrel." I looked at him. Dad didn't often get involved in our arguments. He usually preferred to take Jake's side by tacit agreement, but now it seemed it was really important for him to avoid conflict. I resisted the urge to say something harsh and just picked up my fork, pretending to focus on dessert again. There was an awkward silence in the room again, broken only by the sounds of the appliances. But one thing bothered me. Why did this conversation come up at all? Why did the whole topic of my independence and achievements come up right now, at this dinner? I slowly raised my eyes and met my mom's gaze. She looked at me as if she wanted to say something, but didn't dare. And suddenly I realized that this evening was not just a family holiday. They gathered here for a purpose. But for what purpose? I looked at my parents, at their calm, almost friendly faces, at the way my mother leaned forward slightly, as if trying to convince me of the wisdom of her proposal, at my father, who was just sitting next to me with his arms folded, clearly believing that the conversation had already been decided and I could only agree, at Jake, who didn't even seem to be listening, staring at the phone screen again, and slowly, very slowly, realized that they really weren't joking. They are seriously suggesting that I give up my apartment, my only truly private place, and the stability I have been striving for so long, just so that my spoiled younger brother can avoid the consequences of his own irresponsible decisions. Are you really saying that now? My voice sounded steady, but a real hurricane was starting to boil inside. Tara, dear, understand, Mom began, regaining the same soft, almost affectionate tone she used when she wanted to get her way. Jake is in a difficult situation, and the family must support each other, especially at such moments. I burst out laughing, short, sharp, joyless. Family? Support each other? I shook my head, feeling a surge of anger rise in my chest. I wonder when was the last time one of you supported me? When I was in college and I worked 2 jobs to pay for books because you couldn't afford to give me a little more money? When I rented a tiny room because you refused to help me with housing, explaining that you were saving money, and 3 years later you bought Jake a car? Mom frowned, but I didn't let her get a word in. When did I take extra shifts to save up for the down payment on this apartment, because I knew that if I couldn't do it on my own, no one would help? I exhaled sharply, feeling my hands tremble with anger. And now that I've finally achieved something, now that I have my own place, which I paid for without your help, you come and say, sell it, give the money to your brother, because he did something stupid, poor thing. Jake didn't do anything stupid, the father said sternly, joining the conversation. It is difficult to run a business, sometimes failures happen. I abruptly turned to my brother, who finally looked up from the phone and was now looking at me with mild annoyance, as if he was annoyed that I didn't agree right away. Jake, do you even realize what you're in for? I stared at him, hoping to see at least a shadow of remorse, but I only came across irritated condescension. Of course I'm aware, he shrugged, still remaining surprisingly relaxed, as if we were discussing not huge debts, but some everyday trifle. That's why I need help. Why didn't you ask your parents? I asked angrily, knowing exactly why, but still wanting to hear the answer. We've already helped, Mom interjected, switching back into her son's protective mode. We have paid off some of the debts, but we cannot afford such sums. But I can, right? I chuckled, shaking my head. Of course, because I'm so independent, successful, I have a stable job, savings, my own apartment, so you can just take it and demand that I give it all back, because my little brother has done something again. Tara, please don't exaggerate, Mom sighed, as if I were a moody child who didn't want to share a toy. We're not demanding, we're just asking you to think. No, you demanded. I abruptly got up from the couch, feeling how anger inside was already bubbling on the verge of boiling. You didn't even ask if I wanted to do it, you immediately said that I should help. Because it's the right thing to do, my father interjected, still maintaining his icy calm. No, that's not right, I looked straight into his eyes. It would be right if Jake solved his own problems, because he is an adult and got into them himself. You don't understand, my brother finally intervened, rising from his chair in displeasure. If I don't pay at least part of it now, the collectors will come to me, and then there will be no time for arguments. Ah, that's it, I crossed my arms over my chest, staring at him intently. You didn't just get into debt, you also got involved with some murky people. Jake rolled his eyes. You make it sound like I'm a criminal. It's just a business, everyone has risks. Well, decide your own risks, I said. Tara, think about it, Mom said again, her voice trembling with tension. We're not asking you to leave him to his fate, but do you really want to see your brother crushed by these debts? Has he ever thought about me? I turned to her, squeezing my fingers so hard that my nails dug painfully into my palms. Ever? Mom looked away, but said nothing. My father frowned. Jake sat down again and stared at the phone, and I stood in the middle of the living room, breathing heavily, realizing that this conversation would lead to nothing. They weren't going to listen to me. They saw nothing unfair in their demand. They just decided that I should. But I wasn't going to. I stared at the phone screen, feeling my fingers involuntarily clench into fists, and an icy emptiness rose inside, mixed with rage, pain, and frustration so deep that it tasted like physical nausea. It would seem that I should have gotten used to their attitude a long time ago, to Jake's eternal preference, to their endless excuses for his mistakes, but still, I didn't think they could go that far. I reread the messages over and over again, as if hoping that I was mistaken, that I misunderstood, that these were just emotional words that escaped in the heat of an argument. But no. They saw it that way. I was selfish, ungrateful, greedy, cruel, and, of course, it was all my fault because I dared to disobey, dared to say no. But the most annoying thing was Jake's message. I reread his last lines, and a flame of anger slowly burned in me. He always knew how to hit the hardest, knew where to put pressure to inflict maximum pain. You're going to die alone in this apartment. Congratulations on a great investment. I squeezed my eyes shut and exhaled sharply, trying to calm down. To feel offended now is to let him win. So he got his way, so I let him make me doubt myself again. The hell with it. I put my phone on the bedside table, not answering any messages, and got up from the couch, heading to the bathroom. I needed to clear my head, to wash away this conversation, these looks, these words. When I turned on the water and put my hands under the jets, the coolness brought me to my senses a little, but my thoughts were still racing erratically in my head. Everything that had happened in the past few hours seemed both a nightmare and a predictable scenario. They showed their true colors, not the ones that were hidden behind their smiles, gifts, and family dinners, but the ones that had always been there, but I hadn't wanted to see them for too long. And the worst part wasn't even that they were demanding that I give up my own house for Jake. The worst thing was how easily and quickly they abandoned me, as if I was not their daughter, not a member of their family, but just an obstacle that prevents them from continuing to live the way they used to. You don't deserve to be a part of this family. I swallowed convulsively, closing my eyes. And then, suddenly, I felt better. These words, uttered by my mother in a fit of anger, which at that moment seemed like betrayal to me, suddenly took on a completely different meaning. I really wasn't a part of that family. Not in the sense that I didn't belong to them by blood, but in the sense that I was always a stranger in this house, in their world, in their value system. I was always superfluous there. I dried my hands, left the bathroom, and went into the bedroom. My phone vibrated on the bedside table again, but I didn't even look at the screen. I wasn't going to answer. I wasn't going to make excuses. I wasn't going to waste my life on people who never put me first anymore. Let them think I'm selfish. Let them say that I'm greedy, cruel, and ungrateful. I don't owe them anything anymore. I hung up the call, not giving her a chance for another tirade of accusations, complaints, and emotional blackmail, and for a while I just sat holding the phone in my hand, watching the screen slowly fade out, leaving me in complete silence. Her words were still buzzing in my head, weaving into an endless stream of memories in which I found myself on the sidelines over and over again, forced to give in, adjust, sacrifice my desires, time, money so that Jake could continue to live the way he used to, and my parents could continue to turn a blind eye to his mistakes. But now something has changed. This time, I didn't give up. I took a deep breath, put the phone on the table and went into the kitchen, automatically starting the coffee maker that my parents had given me, although the thought of using it now caused an unpleasant feeling. Everything around me suddenly took on a new hue. Every object in my apartment, every piece of furniture, every piece of decor became not just a thing, but a symbol of what I achieved on my own, without anyone else's help, without someone reaching out to me or paving the way for me. This apartment, these walls, this furniture, it was all mine, bought with my money, earned by my efforts, and no one else can force me to give it up. I took a sip of strong black coffee, feeling the warmth spread through my body, giving me strength, and sat down at my laptop. I had enough things to do, and since it was my day off, I could finally do what I'd been putting off for the last few weeks. But as soon as I opened the browser, my phone vibrated again. This time it wasn't Mom, Dad, or Jake. It was Aunt Lisa. I stared at the screen, not knowing what to expect. Aunt Lisa has always been the very relative who tried to stay away from family conflicts, but at the same time knew about everything that was happening. She never interfered, never took sides, but her tacit support was always felt. Maybe that's why I picked up the phone anyway. "Hi, Aunt Lisa," I tried to sound as calm as possible, but a storm of emotions was still raging inside. "Tara, honey, I don't want to keep you." Her voice was soft, careful, like someone who doesn't want to say anything unnecessary, but I wanted to make sure you were okay. I froze. This is the first time in recent days that someone has asked me this question. Not accusing, not demanding, not pushing for pity, just asking. "Yes," I exhaled slowly. "I'm fine." "I heard what happened last night," Aunt Lisa sighed, and there was something like disappointment in her voice. "Your mom called me this morning, trying to convince me to talk to you." I tightened my fingers around the mug, but said nothing, waiting for her to say next. "I'm not going to tell you what to do, Tara," she continued after a short pause. "But you shouldn't feel guilty for choosing yourself." These words suddenly caused a lump in my throat. "Thank you," I breathed, trying to keep my emotions under control. "I know what it's like," she continued, and there was a weariness in her voice, some kind of lingering pain. "I went through that with your grandparents once, too. It's always been like this in our family. One child is a star, the other is a shadow. I've seen it happen to you and Jake, but I didn't want to get involved. Now I regret it." I slowly closed my eyes. It seems to me that if I put an end to it now, I will never be a part of this family again, I confessed, finally voicing what had been spinning in my head since last night. "Maybe so," Aunt Lisa replied calmly. "But is it really a family if you are not respected in it?" I didn't know what to say. We talked a little more, but soon I said goodbye, feeling that I needed to be alone for a while. After turning off the call, I put the phone on the table and closed my eyes, leaning my forehead against my palm. She was right. I thought I was losing my family, but the truth was, I never had one. Or rather, she existed, but only for Jake. I was in it only as long as I played by the rules, as long as I was comfortable, obedient, and compliant. As soon as I said no, they crossed me out. But, contrary to expectations, it did not bring pain. On the contrary, it brought freedom. I took another sip of coffee, put the mug aside, and, taking a deep breath, opened my laptop. I had a lot of things ahead of me. I took a deep breath as I exited the elevator, trying to stay calm even when my stomach was clenching with tension. My parents turned to me at the same time, and relief flashed in my mother's eyes, as if she really believed that I would change my mind and give up everything to become the comfortable, easygoing daughter they used to see me as. My father, as always, maintained his outward composure, but under his habitual mask, I detected notes of fatigue, irritation, and something else, perhaps anger, because I dared to go against their expectations. "Tara," finally. Mom's voice was shaky, cracked, as if she was about to burst into tears, but I knew her tricks too well to succumb to this naive performance. "We tried to contact you, but you blocked us everywhere." "Because I don't want to talk to you," I replied calmly, crossing my arms over my chest, showing by my whole appearance that this meeting was just a formality for me, and not a sign of weakness. "We need to talk," my father intervened, and there was a commanding note in his voice that I had been used to since childhood. He always believed that all he had to do was tell me what to do, and I would obey without question. You have 5 minutes. I glanced at my watch, then met their eyes again. Go ahead. My mother sobbed and took my father's hand, as if seeking his support. Tara, dear, please understand. Her voice was so soft, as if she was talking to a moody child. We were upset, we said a lot of unnecessary things, but you know that we love you. We just wanted you to help your brother, and you took it so radically. I couldn't help but grin. Radically? Is it radical to refuse to sell your own apartment for the sake of a man who irresponsibly squandered other people's money? Interesting logic. Mom frowned, and Dad pursed his lips in displeasure. Are you really going to give up your family so easily? He muttered, his voice low and strained. You gave up on me, I retorted, looking straight into his cold eyes. You're the one who said I'm not your daughter anymore. You forced us to say this. Mom took a step toward me, but I didn't move. You've always been so stubborn, Tara, but family is more than just money and real estate. It's funny that you only remembered this when I refused to give them to you. My voice was calm, but everything was boiling inside. His father sighed in exasperation, as if this conversation was tiring him more than the whole situation they had created themselves. Look, let's at least discuss helping Jake. You don't have to sell the apartment, but maybe you could take out a loan. We will help with the payments, of course. I closed my eyes for a second, mustering all my willpower not to scream. They really didn't see anything abnormal about it. They really believed that their demands were just. No, I said flatly. I won't take a loan. I won't give back my money. I won't help you with a single penny anymore. Mom froze, and then her face contorted in a mixture of disappointment and anger. Are you really that selfish? Her voice was shaking, but now not from tears, but from rage. After all we've done for you? And what exactly did you do for me? I asked coldly. Seriously, Mom, tell me, what exactly did you do for me, besides considering me secondary next to Jake? The father stepped forward. His voice became harsh, almost threatening. We gave you life. We raised you. We fed you, clothed you, paid for your education. Oh, yes, how could I forget? I tilted my head to one side, feigning thoughtfulness. True, I had to work in the evenings to pay for my textbooks, and the dorm couldn't afford me, but they bought Jake a car for his 16th birthday, right? The father blushed, but did not answer. You don't understand, Mom exclaimed, her voice now filled with real rage. Family is about support, it's about sacrifice, it's about helping each other, and you're acting like a stranger. I looked at her for a long moment. Have you ever sacrificed anything for me? She opened her mouth to say something, but then snapped it shut because she didn't have an answer. That's the whole answer, I shrugged. I am a stranger to you just as much as you are strangers to me. Mom gasped, and Dad grimaced as if I had stabbed him in the heart, but I didn't care. The conversation is over. I looked at the guard, who was closely following our conversation from the next corner of the hall. Sam, can you walk them out? Of course, Miss Mitchell, he replied calmly, taking a step forward. Tara, you're making a huge mistake, my father muttered, but I had already turned away, heading back to the elevator. Let's see, I said over my shoulder, not even looking back. When the elevator doors closed, I exhaled, feeling the huge burden that had been weighing on me for years slowly slip off my shoulders. Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell, his voice was flat and professional, but there was an underlying threat in it that I'd heard before when he represented our company in particularly difficult negotiations. He calmly opened the leather folder and glanced briefly at the notes he had probably already made on my situation. As far as I understand, my client has repeatedly asked you to stop contacting her, but you continue to harass her, threaten her and try to force her into financial obligations that she does not have to you. Mom took a deep breath and looked at her father, but he just clenched his jaw even harder, not finding what to say. This is some kind of misunderstanding. Mom tried to smile, but her voice was shaking. We are just a family that is going through difficult times. We came to talk to our daughter to settle everything. This doesn't look like an attempt to settle everything, Mrs. Mitchell. Mark calmly closed the folder and crossed his arms over his chest, watching them closely. According to Ms. Mitchell's testimony, which she has already documented in our legal department, you and your son have repeatedly sent her abusive messages, tried to psychologically pressure her, demanded a large sum of money from her, threatened her safety, and now openly stated that you are going to continue harassment. Mom paled, and Dad straightened up, as if preparing for a verbal attack, but Mark didn't give them a chance to speak. Therefore, if you do not cease your activities immediately, I will personally file a restraining order against you, which will not only have legal consequences, but will also become an official fact in your personal and professional dossier. In addition, if your actions lead to additional harm to my client, it will be qualified as harassment and blackmail, which is already criminalized. I watched my parents' faces change, anger turned to fear, then disbelief, and then there was a long, agonizing silence. The father still found the strength to speak. That's absurd, his voice faltered, but he quickly regained control of himself. We were just trying to talk to our daughter. Is it illegal now? Trying to talk is not, Mark nodded. But to continue to pursue a person after he has clearly expressed his desire to stop communicating, yes. Mom clutched her purse with her fingers, her hands were shaking. Tara, she tried to plead again, but I held up my hand, stopping her. No, I said firmly, looking her straight in the eye. It's over. I'm not your daughter anymore, as you said yourself. We didn't mean that. Her voice broke, but I didn't care anymore. So you'll have to learn to live with the consequences of your words, I replied coldly. Mark took another step forward and motioned for the guard, who had been standing nearby all this time, observing the situation. Sam, please escort Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell to the exit. If they try to come back, call the police. My parents didn't move. You're not just going to get rid of us, are you? His father had spoken harshly, but there was something like confusion in his voice now. I tilted my head, thinking, but then I smiled anyway. That's exactly what I'm going to do. Mom sobbed, but I didn't even flinch. I watched them slowly turn around and, silently followed by the guards, walk to the exit, as my mother stealthily wiped her eyes, and my father, tense and collected, no longer tried to say anything. Jake wasn't with them, probably too lazy to even pretend to care about family ties. When the doors closed behind them, I felt incredibly relieved. It was like taking a long-awaited deep breath after diving underwater for too long. I turned to Mark, who was watching me intently. Are you sure? What is it? He asked softly, without judgment, without pressure. I nodded. Yes. He pulled a business card from the inside pocket of his jacket and handed it to me. In case they try something else. I took the card, squeezed it in my fingers and smiled. Thanks, Mark. He nodded, looked at me appraisingly once more, as if making sure that I could really handle it, then turned around and headed for the exit. I exhaled and went back up to my office, feeling like I was truly in control of my life for the first time in years. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the cool morning air soaked in the freshness of autumn, and slowly ran my fingers over the body of my camera, feeling its pleasant weight in my hands. I looked at the camera, arranging the frame, an elderly couple by the pond, an old man carefully stretches out his hand with bread crumbs, and his wife laughs, watching his small ducks hurriedly swim closer, snatching treats. There was something warm, simple, and real in that moment, something I had missed so much for many years. I pressed the button, locking in for a moment, and then took a step back, looking around. The city park, where I now came every Saturday, became my personal refuge, a place where I could just be myself, without thinking about debts, blackmail, demands, and guilt, which had been my eternal companion for so long. Now he was gone. Instead, there was silence filled with the rustle of leaves, the laughter of children, and random snatches of conversation from passersby, and for the first time in many years, I felt calm in this silence. My phone vibrated, flashing a short message from Rachel on the screen: "Tickets are booked. In a month, the ocean, wine, and no stress." I smiled, feeling a joyful anticipation rising inside. This trip was another thing I did for myself, another step towards a life where I made my own decisions. I remembered how I had always postponed such things before, explaining it to lack of time, work, and family obligations. Now there were no more excuses. I typed back, "I can't wait." "It's going to be amazing," she sent a message and raised the camera again, watching the world through the lens. It's been a week since that last meeting with my parents at the office, and over the past few days, I've realized how much easier it has become to breathe when there's no constant pressure in my life anymore, when I don't feel obligated to sacrifice myself for people who never did it for me. I didn't feel angry, I didn't even feel relief, just a calm understanding that everything had turned out the way it should have. Aunt Lisa turned out to be right. The bank had indeed confiscated my parents' car, because they couldn't afford the payments without my monthly help. Jake had to sell his Porsche, but even that wasn't enough to cover all his debts, so he returned to his parents' house, where, apparently, he now lived in completely different conditions, no longer being the golden child who was pampered and protected from the consequences of his own decisions. I didn't feel any malice or sympathy. It was just a life that finally started to put everything in its place. I turned around and headed down the parkway, watching the wind sway the treetops, as the sun's rays break through the crowns, creating beautiful patterns of light and shadow on the asphalt. It all seemed so simple, so natural, but at the same time so important. Previously, it seemed to me that freedom was something huge, something difficult, something that needed to be achieved for years, but now I realized that it consisted of small things: the ability to say no, confidence in my own decisions, the ability to spend my money, my time. Spend your life on what brings joy, not on what others dictate. I turned into a cafe at the entrance to the park, ordered a cappuccino and sat at a table by the window, watching the stream of people. A group of students was laughing nearby, an elderly woman was peacefully reading a book at a distant table, and a man was flipping through the news on his phone at the bar. They all lived their own lives, and at that moment I felt like I was a part of this world, and not stuck in the endless drama that had been imposed on me for so many years. My phone vibrated again. This time it was a notification from my banking app. Another bonus for a successfully completed project was credited to my account. I grinned, remembering how in the past every additional income caused me anxiety, not because the money was superfluous, but because I knew that at any moment I could receive a call from my parents with another request for help. Now this bonus belonged only to me, and I no longer had to explain to anyone how I was going to spend it. I opened my notes on my phone and quickly jotted down a shopping list for the trip: a new swimsuit, comfortable sandals for walking, and a few books for the road. All this was my choice, my little joy, a part of the life that I was finally building according to my own rules. I took a sip of coffee, enjoying its taste, and at that moment I realized that for the first time in many years I was not thinking about the past, not worrying about the future, but just living in the present. And it was perfect.